Hi everyone, it's Guillaume from Startup Basecamp. Welcome to the Tech4Climate Podcast. During the show, you will have the opportunity to meet the best climate tech founders, investors, and experts from both Silicon Valley and around the globe. They will share with you their stories and personal journeys into this growing and exciting industry, giving you some insight into the ecosystems that help you to take part in the fight against climate change and benefit from the opportunities it can represent. The podcast is divided in two small interviews. So in the first part, you will get to know our speakers, their perspectives on the climate crisis and how climate tech is changing the game. The second part of the discussion will be for members of our community who will learn the speakers' secret sauce on how to and share with you their unique expertise on topics such as fundraising, management, strategy, and so on, to help you to become a better leader in your field. So before we start, I would like to quickly share what we are doing at Startup Basecamp to support climate tech founders in accessing resources and gaining visibility with investors they seek. Our initiatives include a membership-based community platform offering access to a dedicated Slack group with a growing number of founders, experts, and investors from around the world, and a series of exclusive content such as interviews, weekly job listings, events, and our quarterly online pitch of night opportunity. But more than a place where you can learn, exchange, and grow, we are building a matchmaking service to facilitate connections between our members and top investors and experts in the field. And soon, alongside with other top investors, we will be launching a small fund to co-invest in the growth and acceleration of our members. Finally, all of this is possible because of your support and donations. We are a small self-funded team, and we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. So please share one episode with a friend and subscribe to the channels. As an added bonus, we will plant a tree for each of our subscribers each time we reach 1,000 new fans or donors. Do not hesitate to connect with me via social media or email Guillaume at Startup Basecamp. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope to get in touch with you soon. And now, let's go for the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Tech4Climate Podcast. I'm Guillaume, your host, and each week we give you the stories of climate tech founders and investors and their unique insights into this fast-moving ecosystem. Today, we are speaking with Phil Morle, partner at Main Sequence Venture based in Australia. Over his long career, Phil has found that his superpower is helping founders fill out their canvas of ideas. He now helps founders grow their teams by investing in global companies that have science at their core. Deeptech investors and foodtech expert, Phil gives us a deep dive into why we need to rethink the whole foodtech ecosystem. In the second part of the show, Phil explains the details of slam dunk financing and how you should use it to pitch investors. He also gives a few tips on achieving a good work-life balance and the books he uses to get there. Phil, welcome to the show. Hi Phil, welcome to the Tech4Climate Podcast. I'm super happy to have you here with us today, directly from Australia, so that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to this great opportunity to hear your story and get up to speed on what you guys are looking at with Main Sequence Venture. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So before we start, as everyone knows, can you give us like a 30-second introduction about Main Sequence Ventures?
The Main Sequence Ventures is a deep tech venture capital firm based in Australia, but investing in global companies that have got science at their core.
That's less than 30 seconds. That was less than 30 seconds. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So let's start from the top. Can you tell us a bit more about your personal story and background? What are you passionate about? What do you do besides working and supporting and investing in founders? I mean, what makes you feel inspired or like your best self, as I like to ask? Who is Phil?
Well, I do have things that I do outside of my work, but I also do love my work. I love it very much and I do it a lot and it's very important to me. And let me sort of walk through how I got here and then that'll help you understand why. I mean, I think of myself as a maker. I actually went to art college I then studied drama. I became a theatre director. And that was my first career. It was actually making plays and bringing people together, not paying them any money, having to hold them together into this tight unit of people that wanted to make something great just for the sake of making that great thing. And that really defined what I am and what I do. I like to make things with what I have around me. During that time, obviously, in theatre, you don't get paid that much money. So I needed to have a side hustle. And my side hustle became very quickly making websites for people. So this is how my sort of technical skill grew pretty quickly. And I became a website developer. I started getting quite busy doing that. And then when the internet started going crazy, I thought, wow, Phil, you've got to decide to get on the train or watch the train go off. And that was at the end of the 90s. And I decided I was going to get on the train. And at the time, I thought, gosh, I'm going to hate having this real job in technology. But, I'll go and have a sabbatical every year and I'll make some theatre that I want to make. And I realized when I got into the work, that what I loved was bringing teams together generally, and then working with those teams to make something. This became the sort of common thread for me, and that sort of ended up with me becoming the chief technology officer at a quite a big startup at the time called Kazaa, which was one of the post-Napster file sharing companies that got me very, very sued by all the record companies and all the movie studios, and that sort of defined the next few years of my life. And then I wanted to join another startup, though. I was wanting to do that even more. I'd really tasted the startup possibility, and there weren't any at the time. This is in 2008. And so I sort of scratched my own itch and I created Australia's Y Combinator, basically, which was called Pollenizer at the time. And that's what I did for the next 10 years. And during that, I started, I learned the art of deliberately making companies, which is, very specifically what I do now. And towards the end of it, I started working with scientists in the labs of Australia and thought, oh my God, this is amazing. This is worlds colliding of entrepreneurship and venture with the depth and impact that's possible in science. And that's how I got to where I am in my work. And I hope you can see that, what's not to love about that? What a great job.
That's fantastic. I mean, for the people who are listening to the show, who in a way maybe aspire to become like investors, what would be like, if you can recall during this whole journey, like one or two pieces of experiences that kind of helped you in a way to become the investor that you are today, and that gave you an edge to join the firm as a partner.
One of the wonderful things about being an investor when you understand it is it's not actually about, having a technical skill so much like being a doctor or being a lawyer. I think people misunderstand venture when they think of a venture capitalist as a banker who needs to sort of understand legal term sheets and documents and how to value things as though there's a sort of mathematical formula to do that. But especially in the early stages, it's a very different job, and I liken it to people to be much more like being a movie producer or a showrunner in TV these days, where you're deploying capital, but you're deploying capital into a vessel which is sort of not fully formed yet, and you want to help it form, and you want to bring in talent, and you want to sort of help bring in more technology and more people and know how to market and know how to tell the story and everything that a company needs. So now coming back to your question, the important thing to do is to have experiences in your life where you can inform that job in an interesting and unique way. And when we hire new investors in Main Sequence, we're always looking for something new, and it's quite infuriating because people say, but specifically, what do you want me to be good at? And we'll say, well, we want you to be good at something that we're not already good at. What are you good at? What's your special superpower? What's your skill? What do tell me something interesting. And so it's, have an interesting life. And then specifically, it's sort of start practicing deploying that interesting life with startups. There's so many opportunities to meet startups, go to co-working centers, become a mentor in an accelerator program, even coach in accelerator programs to help. Um, Send an email to a venture capital firm and say, I'd like to come and work with you for free for a month and see what happens on the inside. And just start doing the synthesis job of throwing your life against that work and just seeing where the sort of sparks start to fly. And, anyone can do it because humans are interesting people. But that's where you got to find the way to apply it uniquely.
So if I may ask, then what's your superpower?
Um, my superpower is to help people to share it with as many people in the world as possible, um, specifically so that those people will help you, right? So I am in my comfort zone when people have nothing. It's a blank canvas. You don't know what to do. My superpower is let's figure out how to fill out that canvas so it's the most beautiful thing anybody can see, and they want to play a part in what comes next.
So you have been, as you mentioned at the beginning of your journey, at the origin of the Aussie tech ecosystem. Then you really foster and accelerated the opportunity for other founders, by creating the YC of Australia. But that's a traditional tech ecosystem. And then you mentioned, getting closer to scientists and trying to touch that a little bit and understand. Because I mean, today when Sequence Venture, you guys are investing in, at least in climate tech and this solving this major problem that you are all facing in Australia is always at the forefront of those effect and direct consequences of it. So, what has been during this whole journey, this aha moment that you could define or recall as such that, in a way, pushed you to take the leap and move into that category?
When I was in the final years of Pollenizer, one of our final jobs was to design and run a program here in Australia that was called the On Accelerator program. And this was run by the CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, which is Australia's national science agency. And it was run across all the universities in Australia. So if you were a scientist or researcher and you had an idea for something and some IP that could become a company, you went through that accelerator program. And it was the first of its kind in Australia. And I'd just spent 10 years doing Pollenizer, the classic sort of generation one internet startups, so marketplaces, early SaaS companies, media, advertising, that kind of thing. And I was getting a little bit bored because we were making hundreds and hundreds of companies, and the same ideas were coming around, and we were pretty good at it. And you get bored of something when you're kind of so good at it, you're just kind of doing the same thing time and time again. And and then I walked into the first of these workshops, and there were 100 scientists in the room across multiple teams, and the first thing that struck me was I didn't understand a word anyone was saying, right? They were all so terrible at describing what it was they were making and certainly why it was valuable. They were talking in their own little bubbles, like literally the Tower of Babel, like no one could understand each other outside their own discipline. And then certainly they were not able to describe what the potential business is, why someone might pay you money for this, why it's valuable. and we were just kind of miles away from anything we might call a startup today. And then we took the time going through the work of these teams, and I was just overwhelmed with how powerful it was. That feeling of, wow, can humans really do this? Like, this is extraordinary. And that's when I kind of realized that when you to bring together what I do, which is to take some raw material and make it into a company that people get excited by, and to really just operationalize that with a scientist that knows how to sequester carbon or invent a whole new kind of food or build a quantum computer or build a radar system that doesn't actually involve actually sending beams out into space or whatever it's going to be. I thought, wow, there's the rest of my life sort of laid out on the road in front of me. And I think especially around the climate challenge, I mean, this ultimately, I'm an optimist. I'm a sort of tech optimist. I think we can solve anything. We just have to find a way. And certainly, when you look at climate, there are solutions to it all. We just have to do it. And I think, I feel very fortunate to be where I am right now, where I can play a role in bringing together that science with the impact that can come with venture to actually solve some of these problems that are before us.
So let's take a zoom out and a step back at the food tech, ag tech ecosystem and its potential to contribute to the fight against climate change today. I mean, maybe you can start by giving us some data points regarding the impact of food production and consumption on the climate crisis. And after we can maybe go a little bit deeper into the landscape today. What are the fundamentals that drive the food tech market today? I know that you are a specialist on that topic, so would love to hear a bit more from you. But let's start maybe with the larger framework and the data point here.
Yeah. So my journey I haven't always been a food person. So coming into food, I was struck in the accelerator program that the food companies were actually the hardest to make. So if you think about making a company that is making a new kind of food, there are so many dimensions to it. So I'll give you an example. There was a terrific team in the accelerator program that had a whole new way of delivering bioavailable calcium to humans. They had this new way of making this calcium that it didn't need to come from dairy. But they didn't know what form factor it would be in. Would it be would it be a sweet? Would it be a drink? Would it be a supplement? Why would people buy it? What would the packaging look like? What's the supply chain? It's all just incredibly complicated. It's got so many dimensions to it. Does it taste nice? That's when I started thinking, gosh, these are really the ultimate challenge. We've got to be able to get these things right. When I joined CSIRO was founded to solve the food problem. It's a 100-year-old science organization, and the first science discipline it ran was food and agriculture, because Australia is, it's an enormous landmass, but it's not, verdant fields just ready for planting. It's a very rough country. And so we had to use science from 100 years ago, and that's been running through the veins of CSIRO since then. But that's when I understood that food is not what we all think it is when we go shopping. We assume food is just going to be available. Food from anywhere around the world will be on the shelves for us to buy. That food is natural and is actually good for the climate. Surely the terrible stuff is this stuff in bottles and cans and things, but beautiful steak, that Daisy the cow grew on the pasture, or that beautiful glass of milk. They're of course completely natural, and I should consume a lot of those. But what I realized is there's a few things going on. That first of all, it's getting harder and harder to make food with each hectare of land that we have. Climate change is moving the agricultural land mass, as it gets hotter in certain regions, and we're able to make less and less corn and wheat and whatever it is we need to make. So that's problem number one. Climate changes make it harder to make food. So we need to use science to make, to adjust to what climate change is doing. But then it's actually looking at the environmental impact of some of those things that we're working on. So I'll just stay on the land for the moment. We're throwing so many chemicals, herbicides, pesticides at the land that we're killing the soil, and the soil is where all the nutrients are, and the soil is where all the carbon is sequestered. Over time, everything that we're eating is becoming less and less and less healthy. I mean, it's frightening how the food is losing its nutrients. Oranges, for example, are often grown in sand these days, and we inject vitamin C into the orange rather than the orange growing the vitamin C. I mean, this is the crazy world that we're living in. And so all of these things, we need technology so that the soil starts pulling the carbon back in and putting it back in the soil. Massive carbon sink if we get that right. And I'll give you an example there. We have a company called Loam Bio who make microbes that exist with the roots of a plant. They live with the roots of a plant, and those microbes drag carbon out of the atmosphere through the plant, through the roots, into the soil to sequester it for hundreds of years. If we farm US soy using that product, we will cancel out the emissions that US cars put into the atmosphere. That's the scale of what one piece of technology could do. In livestock, of course, this is a huge problem that I find few people understand, that dairy and meat production, especially beef, are frightening in terms of their unsustainability. So, for example, the average cow will kind of emit 40 kilos of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for every kilo of meat that you make. And if you compare that to, other things, or plant-based meat, for example, it'd be like 1 kilo for 1 kilo, something like that. So it's an incredible emitter. But again, more importantly, we're just literally running out of planet. So there is no more land to put more cows on. New Zealand is heavily polluted because it's a dairy company. It's New Zealand is sort of is a dairy company, and the cows just pollute all the rivers, and there's no more land to put the cows on, and it's a real problem. So we can't just make more. And here's the problem: we need to make twice as much between now and 2050. So how do we make twice as much milk? How do we make twice as much beef? How do we make twice as much wheat when climate change is reducing the land mass, when we've already run out of land, we've already run out of water, we've already run out of these things? And, our thesis in the fund is we call it feeding 10 billion people because we need to make twice as much food for 10 billion people, and we're going to use half the planet to do so. So they're the kind of things we're investing in, companies that solve for that problem.
So you mentioned already, I would say, the fundamentals that drive this market and this innovation in a way. I mean, we hear a lot about alternative proteins, robot farming, planet-friendly pesticides, and their potential. Maybe can you give us a little bit like your view where which categories into the food tech and ag tech today needs the most innovation and still like a blank states where this you see a lot of like potential and where entrepreneurs listening to the show maybe if they're working on an idea should go and knock on your door.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I think it's just an enormous canvas of opportunity. So first of all, um, how do we farm? Let's sort of answer that question. And I mentioned earlier, we just sort of blast everything with pesticides and chemicals, and we till the soil like crazy, and that's what's worked for generations. But we need to do it differently now, and that goes back to so what is it that we grow, and what are the seeds that we plant? So there's all the innovation around that. We can make new seeds which are more tolerant to climate change. We can make new seeds which grow things in a more abundant way, so we get more yield out of each hectare. We can make seeds which do something unique that the new kinds of food need those seeds to produce. So, for example, much of the plant-based meat is made from soybeans, but soybean has a bit of a smell, right? It has a beanie smell. It's a soybean, but you can grow a special kind of soy, which one of our companies is doing, that has no flavor. And then you've got this really strong base to actually then build back up the meat flavors to create your plant-based meat. So there's right down there at that upstream stage on the farm, you've got all that innovation around what is planted and then what is applied to it, like the loam, microbes so that you're sequestering the soil and you can get your carbon credits and all that kind of stuff. And then you're sort of moving into the kind of the automation of that, which we've hardly seen any of that now. And we're looking at that again. We've got now a data layer over agriculture, which has taken the last sort of certainly 5 years, maybe 10 years to grow. That's been hard to do anything with until recently because it's been patchy. There's been company A that does, potatoes in the Ukraine and company B that does, sorghum in Australia. And they're kind of, there's just all these patches. Whereas now we've got this blanket of data and analysis across the world. Now there's this really interesting moment where all the automation can rise and actually plug into that. So all these robots that can actually operate the farms can do work that is feeding off that data and interacting in real time with the actual state on the ground. And this is really interesting around things like um, you probably know that when you sell something like an avocado to a supermarket, it has to be exactly the same, like a whole tray of exactly the same avocados. But what can happen is if you grow avocados in field A and field B is got a slightly different microclimate, for example, it's all different. Whereas these new robot systems with the data layer can just adjust in real time and know what to do with all their crop modeling to actually just deliver exactly the right avocados in the most sustainable way. Um, and we're going to see that sort of massively moving things into much more sustainable methods of farming. Um, and one of the things that's dragging that out of the labs and onto the farm is COVID, of course, where the whole workforce in agriculture has been slashed, and farmers are struggling to find the workers they need. And it's a really good time to sell them a robot and move them to a new system. And then next we kind of move up into what is the food itself, and that's an area where we're extremely busy. We believe we've just got to make food in an entirely different way, as well as the ways that we're making it today. Um, but for example, we have a dairy company called Eden Brew that's making milk that's exactly like a cow would make, but it's completely sustainable because it's brewed like beer. You know, it's made in a factory. It's not made in a cow. You don't need to make a cow and keep it alive for years to get the milk that you want to have, and the cow isn't going to be burping, you know, methane emissions and all that. So there's, I mean, I hope what I'm communicating here is this is at each step, if you start in the soil putting a seed in, and you sort of make your way through the whole system all the way up to a human putting something into their mouth, there are sustainability choices, there are problems all along the way, there are nutrition problems, you know, there's problems at every single step, and each of them needs a company. You know, it's no surprise that there are companies, there are venture capital firms that only do food because they'll be busy only doing food.
So you mentioned, and that's very interesting. I mean, on one side, modifying seeds to, you know, give them like new properties. You mentioned about like, you know, brewing milk. We spoke about like, you know, alternative proteins, but all of that. I mean, there's always like this some concern about the Frankensteinization of our
Yeah.
food system and the food that we eat. I mean, can you tell us maybe what's the red line to not cross in a way? How is the consumer that are, you know, the future or already the buyers of those products coming out of those companies that you guys are supporting? I mean, how is the market reacting to that, and how do you communicate that around, and how do you maybe keep like also like some safeguard here to make sure
Mm.
that we don't do in a way worst, even by being excited of new you know, solution. And you know, speaking a lot of in the European side about GMO like 15 years ago. So now today technology is giving even more opportunities to really like customize what we want to produce. But what's your opinion on that, and how is the you know, the market and the consumer, the adopters reacting to that?
Well, you know, we've been doing it for thousands of years, and people, I think we need to have a different conversation with the people of Earth, right? Because we assume that all food is naturally grown, and that we can continue doing that, and we should always return to those roots, if you like, of how food is produced. But if you take corn, for example. That is a human edited, yeah, even it's probably even better to say a human created food. It is a engineered product. Yeah, the natural corn looks more like grass. You know, it's a tiny little stalk with, you know, grass seeds on top, and it's actually highly nutritious. It's got a very strong flavor. It's very hard to eat. You'd imagine, you know, a cow eating it or something like that. Um, but over hundreds and even thousands of years, we have edited that selectively. You know, we have bred it selectively to make this big sort of exploding cylinder of sugar, which is corn today, right? But that's human created. You know, that corn is not natural. Um, Now, sort of compare that to something that sort of sounds really strange. There's a company in the UK, for example, that has modified the genes of a tomato so that the little scar that you have on top of the tomato disappears, right? And so you end up with this tomato that sort of is a strange sort of, you know, perfect sphere almost. Well, it's not a sphere, it's still tomato shaped, but it doesn't have that scar on top. And this is really important because most tomatoes are wasted because that little scar goes moldy first and then the mold spreads across the tomato. If you don't have it, they last much longer. Now, this seems to be a really good thing. It's actually no different to how the corn was modified, but the corn was just done with breeding over a long time. This is done by sort of modifying the gene of the of the tomato. But it's a tomato. It's not a tomato, you know, half tomato, half giraffe, or you know, it's not. It's not a tomato that's got some new chemical in it that might hurt you. It's just a tomato and it doesn't have a scar on top. Similarly, we can make crops that just don't need as much water. We make cows that don't need as much rain, right? This all happens, but it's still a cow, and no one's hurt the cow, and nothing bad's happened to the cow. It just means actually the cow won't suffer when it doesn't rain as much in Australia, and so these kind of things happen. I think one of the biggest mistakes we made as innovators is we used the language we used as scientists with consumers. We used genetically modified organism as a way of describing, the work we do, and we described that to customers, and that's what started going on labels. If you do a consumer study on GMO, most consumers will tell you they think it's bad. If you say, why is it bad? Most consumers will say they don't know, but most of their friends tell them it is, right? And of course, if you're thinking about eating food, like who wants to eat something that's got a genetically modified organism, anything anywhere near it? It's just the wrong word. And of course, that's where this whole horrible imagination thing starts happening with people. But we need to talk about it because this is how we're going to actually feed ourselves. This is a serious problem, right? I personally believe there is no version of the future where we are going back to natural farming methods to feed the 10 billion people that are going to be on the earth. We need to do it another way. And if you take the milk example I gave you, I mean, let's sort of look at what's happening there. You're effectively making the. So how's milk made today? Well, first of all, we make this factory called a cow, and then what we do is we hack the cow's milk production system, which is meant for its baby's nutrition, so that it makes more of that milk. And we keep it pregnant all year long, and we feed it lots of hormones, and we give it lots of antibiotics because we're milking them so much they're going to get infected somehow. And so I guess the first comment is that that's not particularly natural, right? That's pretty extreme. But but that's how that is. Think of it like a machine that makes milk. That's what it ultimately is. The other way is you brew it like beer. You make yeast. You have a special kind of yeast. This is what the scientists are developing. And that special yeast doesn't produce alcohol when you feed it sugar or some other carbon source. It produces the different dairy proteins that milk needs. Excuse me. And so these dairy proteins are exactly the same as the dairy proteins that the cow machine would produce, but they're actually produced just like making beer in big stainless steel tanks, and the yeast is producing them, and then you recombine them back into milk again. And using this method, you can make vast amounts of milk, like enormous amounts. Like I've calculated that you could do many multiples of the current Australian dairy production just out of one big brewery. So it's a big business. Could be as big as the coal mining in Australia, right? Making milk. But coming back to your question, it's not Franken milk. It is milk. It's exactly the same stuff. It's just been produced by this sort of special yeast, and the yeast has been genetically modified, but the yeast isn't in the food, right? So the
So,
yeast goes nowhere near the food.
out of curiosity, because you hear my French accent and I'm from Belgium, country of cheese. I mean, is that milk suitable for dairy product like cheese and others,
Yeah,
or we still need to
it
stick
is. Yeah.
to the old-fashioned way? Fantastic.
No, no. Yeah. I mean, that's where the innovation comes in. what's happened in these new ways of making milk is people have started with um, the simpler dairy products. So ice cream, for example, has one dairy protein in it, and there are some of these new dairy companies who are making ice cream and they've made this one protein. But if you want to make a beautiful, soft French stinky cheese, you need to have, you need to have all that, as many of the proteins as you can make and have those in there. And then, then you can make a cheese. So yeah, we've set our company a challenge to make a beautiful Parmesan at the moment. That's their mission.
That's exciting. Couple of more
Yeah.
questions, Phil, to close this section. I'd like to zoom in a little bit on the Aussie landscape in itself. Like, if you can tell us a bit more, like, what are the Aussie advantages and weaknesses in regard of like decarbonization? How do you compare Australia versus US or enlarge the rest of the world? Do you see any major roadblocks? What are the constraints that you have identified? I mean, is it new of like need of new policies or new politicians in place? Maybe new lobbyists, or maybe it's lack of funding, maybe lack of like R&D and startups. I mean, what needs to happen to accelerate this decarbonization of the Australia in general?
Um, I, I think Australia is doing some things really well, and it's been doing some things really badly. Um, uh, in terms of what we're doing really well, I would say in the, let's say, the ESG driven change of industry, there's a good conversation happening there, and there's a lot of targets independent of government targets where the companies, even the big mining companies and the mineral companies and the big retailers and the supermarkets, they're all going for ambitious sustainability targets, which I think is really exciting. Um, we have had in the past a government which has been very resistant, even climate denying, I would say, in the past, and I think that's been driven by the fact that our economy is a commodity economy. We make a lot of money in Australia from pulling things out of the ground and selling them. So that could be coal, it could be uranium, it could be wheat, but it's still we're a commodity a country that needs to keep the mining companies and the primary produce makers happy. At least that's been the sort of the general conversation. Um, we had a very significant change here at the last general election that many people actually call the climate election, where kind of enough was enough. And we had a lot of independents rising, and definitely the public voted for a climate positive future. And there's quite a lot of things happening in government now, which we're all feeling very optimistic about. The interesting thing about Australia is it doesn't have the complexity of Europe with all the different countries. It doesn't have even the complexity of the US with all the different states, which can be as complex as the EU sometimes. Um, we do have different states, but we are able to do things um, um, at scale when we set our mind to doing it. And if you look at what happened during COVID, I think many people criticized Australia as kind of a prison because everyone thought we were all kind of locked down and things weren't happening. But actually, yeah, that for the most part, everything was okay here in Australia as long as you weren't, working in a restaurant or something or in tourism or something. Um, and what you saw from outside was a whole country actually doing something, right? And that's my optimistic view about climate now. What we're starting to see is a lean in, and an active ear listening to what it is that we need to do. Um, and I think we're going to see some movement. My concern is back to the storytelling, and I don't mean telling fairy tales. I mean clear, purposeful communication about what we're trying to do, um, and um, and why things are a certain way. So, for example, if if we're trying to reduce emissions, what is the truth about, how one thing is emitting a certain amount and another thing is emitting a different amount? Who's right? Like who decides? And what happens when one person, has some hardship because of that ruling versus the other person? And so there's a kind of honesty that we need, a courageousness, and a conviction. Um, but I think if any country can do it well, it's Australia, is my belief, because there's just fewer people, fewer states. We should be able to go for it and get it right.
Fantastic. So let's go into the specifics of Main Sequence Venture. Like, can you tell us a bit more about like the story, the genesis of it? What was the initial gap that led to the thesis? And how, I mean, if you can tell us a bit more about this really like initial, story and vision behind the fund.
Yeah. So back in the years before the fund was founded, so sort of 2015, 16, there was an observation that whilst Australia has some of the best research in the world, if you measure it by citations and actual impact and invention, we're sort of in the top percent of the world. If you measure us by commercialization, it's or at least it was appallingly bad. I hope it's a much better number now, but in the OECD rankings of sort of commercial impact, we were 70 something. We were kind of like a Southeast Asian, developing market. It was awful. And so and a whole bunch of interventions happened at that time, which were very, very positive, which were federal government interventions. So things like the On Accelerator that I described earlier to make universities better at commercializing what they're doing. There's a very successful program called the R&D tax concession, which allows companies to get back a 50% credit on everything they spend on R&D. It's been an amazing, funding fuel for innovation here. And then another one was, what if there was a venture capital fund that knew what to do with hard technology, with deep technology, with science, and started making investments? Would we get more companies that way, and would we capture the value and make these globally significant companies? So the government put the first 100 million Australian dollars into our fund, and then we all came in and we raised another 150 million on top of that from the private sector. And we created this fund and set ourselves the task of understanding what our job was. To what do you do differently if you're working with science as your raw material? And that was the first main sequence, and it's been the thesis was right, I will say, because we've invested in some incredible companies. The pipeline just gets fatter and bigger every month. The quality of the companies in that pipeline increases. People know what to do. The discipline in research for making a company, not just inventing something, is now a lot more intuitive and spreading across the system. And then because we're investing in deep tech, it means all the investors that were on the precipice of investing in deep tech, but kind of were just a bit worried they didn't quite understand it. We can co-invest with them and we can help with our scientific community, which are part of Main Sequence, to actually help understand an opportunity. So it's causing more venture capital firms to invest in deep tech. So the whole market is kind of exploding here, and it's become a very big category of investment here in Australia. So the fund is definitely working in that regard. In terms of the things which we do um, special, the simplest way to put it is it's practically impossible for any mortal to create a deep tech company. So to make a quantum computing company or a satellite company or a new kind of food or um, I mean, I often gave Impossible Foods as an example when we first founded the fund. I mean, how if you're a scientist and you're saying, I think I could make meat without animals, what does it take? And at the time, we were looking at Impossible Foods, and it had had $1 billion invested into it. $1 billion, and you can't get that from grants, right? You need the private sector, you need venture capital, you need this entrepreneurship around it. And so what we learned is, you can't just go to you can't just get a desk at WeWork and sit there with your laptop and start working and build a company like you perhaps could if you were a publishing platform or something like that. You need help. You need IP. You need labs. You need production facilities. You need prototyping. You need talent, which is really hard to find. And where is it? And so we've found that the earlier we go, the better, and without interfering to the extent that it's useful, we really help. So let's go back to that movie producer sort of metaphor. It's like making a movie, and the IP is you've got a script. You've got the first draft of the script, and it looks pretty good. You can sort of imagine the movie, but there's everything to build. Um, and so, we've had to become a sort of full service venture capital firm. Starts very early. We've got ways to help with talent. We've got ways to help with marketing. We've got ways to help with branding and design. We've got recruitment programs. We've got ways of nurturing talent between universities and our fund. We have researchers coming into our fund to be investors for a little while so they can feel what it's like. It's all these things that just sort of, smash down the walls, break down the silos, get people talking and building things together from a very early stage.
So going back into the investments that you guys do, I mean, we covered a little bit like the food tech on one side. You mentioned like the deep tech. So which sector, maybe you can mention one or two, are the most promising for you today in terms of what I call ICR or impact cash return? I mean, meaning building impactful companies while creating highly profitable business. Do you see any
Yeah.
underdogs or subsectors areas that you're super excited about?
Yeah, yes, I think so. What what we find in the, it's like um, you need to sort of have a truffle nose, right? And you're sort of sniffing out for opportunities. So what happens is, as you get to the edge of one opportunity, you sort of smell the next thing and you kind of go to it. So, as an example, when we invested and founded really V2 Food, which is now Asia's biggest sort of plant-based meat company, we got to the point of we got to kind of the edge of the innovation around the protein, if you like, where we thought, how do we make this better? We realized fat was missing. Like fat was a really important part of the whole experience of meat. And so we needed to figure out how to make fat without animals. And that led us to create a company called Nourish, which is making animal fat without animals. Similarly, as we make all the food in this way, we've realized that you can make materials in the same way. You can make immensely sustainable materials from things that normally make food. So, for example, we've just recently I invested in a company called Ulu that makes plastic from seaweed. It makes a bioplastic that actually sequesters eight, sorry, let me get the numbers right. It'll actually put 5 kilos of carbon into the sea for every kilo of plastic you make, which is just an extraordinary, inversion to what actually happens with fossil fuels. But we've kind of got to that because it's fermented in the same way the milk is fermented that I was describing earlier. It's made in the same way as food, and it's made from a feedstock, which is a food. And so you start to see all these possibilities, and then you go, wow, well, how do we make more of this? How do we make that at scale? What are the companies that are going to help us make this bigger, and who's going to be working with this new kind of plastic and all that? So you sort of end up moving out to all these areas. Um, in terms of the impact, versus the money, I'm absolutely of the view, as I'm sure many people are now, that now there is no separation. Perhaps there was a day where people chose to, they said it's okay, impact is more important than the money on this thing. I'm fine for it to go to impact. Um, uh, but now I think the most valuable companies in the world over the next 10 to 20 years are going to be companies that solve problems for a planet in trouble, and they are going to be hugely impactful. That's where the money's going to be. That's not going to be in digital products. It's going to be in companies that play a part in climate change and decarbonization and new food systems and food security, disease, tackling, healthcare pandemics. There's just all the, these are these are just massive problems that people have to pay for, and we're excited to be working in that area. One area that we're looking at the moment, I don't know if you've got any ideas, but we're very excited about water as a general thematic. So to give you an example of something we're just looking at fresh, it seems that there's an enormous problem around water. So is the water in the right place? Where's the water moving around the world? Um, how do we work around drought? How do we recycle water, especially if we've got these new ways of making food that need water? How do we make sure that water goes back into the system? It doesn't get wasted at the end of the process. And actually, we're seeing a lot of that, actually, a lot of investments which are starting to explore as we invent these new systems that create some kind of waste, how is that waste going straight into another system or another company so that we've got this, we're sort of designing the circular economy as we go. So it's one of the things I'm very excited about, that the companies are all talking out loud to each other. They're saying, "Hey, I've got this waste. What would you do with it?" You know, and there's always an answer. So it's pretty exciting.
So, but thanks for sharing all of those super valuable insights. On the opposite side, like what are, and you don't need to name any companies, but what are the maybe the sectors or like pitches that you saw that for you makes no sense and in fact look more like greenwashing or waste of time and resource? Do you have like one or two examples that you don't believe in at
The one that I haven't got to conviction on yet is vertical farming. Um, it's I see the logic of it, but I see a lot of companies all doing the similar sort of thing. It always ends up in a kind of shipping container with kind of LED lighting and automation in there, and then making leafy greens or something like that. And there's definitely a purpose for that. But we haven't seen the breakthrough, which is the sort of true replacement of something that happens in broad acre. So but I'm always looking. I'm sort of keen to see that, and I suspect that as our energy systems improve, because one of the big problems for these companies is they use a lot of energy to actually heat the heat and light the crops. As we build out our renewable energy systems, and we bring these worlds together, these are going to improve. The where we tend to get to a no is on the size of the business and the size of the impact. Sometimes things are quite subscale, and it can be a problem in agriculture where the problem that you're trying to solve is very specific and therefore quite small and hard to sort of scale to the rest of the world. So I gave the example earlier that, many of the early sort of digital data systems for agriculture were, operating on a single crop in a single part of the world, and the whole thing just kind of changed when you moved it to another part of the world. So it was absolutely not a Silicon Valley style, build a simple app and then just sort of advertise the heck out of it, and everyone around the world uses it, and you get to scale. And so, but I think that comes back again a little bit to one of the things we do differently in the fund, which is we help inventors to actually see and unearth what could be a much bigger version of their business. One of the things that inventors tend to do is, if they've invented a widget, they'll create a company called Widget Co, and that company makes the widgets, rather than saying, well, what does that widget actually do, and what are other things like that, and what could this be the first product in a broader suite of value that we sell to a certain kind of customer. And we do a lot of that kind of work, and there's nearly always a bigger version of the company in there.
Last question for the around the fund on my side, and I see time is running already. But how strict and are you in terms of like measuring impact in terms of potential impact in terms of CO2 or greenhouse gas emission that could be removed to avoid, or maybe eventually social impact? I mean, to base your to decide and invest in this company, like how strict are you and how do you calculate that? Is that something really is the main driver at the early stage for you guys, or still something that will be adjusted in the future, hopefully?
No, it's. I would say we have friends in venture capital who have very inspiring designs, which are, for example, where the carry for the investment team is at risk if certain emissions targets aren't hit by their portfolio over time, which I'm inspired by, and I expect we will explore things like that in the future for our fund. We've chosen to be not um, um, not so extreme that we won't move unless there's this very clear target. We want to know generally what can be your impact, how big could it be. We do actually ask each company before we invest to actually say what their impact metric is, and it's usually some emissions change or of some kind, and we hold them to that. And we've started doing that much earlier in the process, even before we invest. When we're doing the final due diligence and we're just about to get going with them, it's like we agree what that number is. And even if the number kind of nothing changes for years, right? It's greenhouse gas emission reduction. Well, of course, if you're in the lab for the next 4 years, it's like nothing. It's important to sort of track it every single board meeting and make it a thing. Um, and some of our companies, it's the absolute driving metric. Many of them are set up B Corps straight away, so that they sort of bake that into the operations of their business. And so not it's not hardcore, but we do have a number, we do track it, and it's important to us.
Last question on my side. It's more a personal question. As I mentioned before, like, what's your personal view on the climate crisis? As I always ask, are we doomed? What would you say to people who feel in a way demoralized by all the terrible news and already visible consequences of climate change?
I think we're going to fix it. I think the conversation I'm trying to have is when you look at the world from my perspective. Like you and I sat here now and started walking through the various horror stories that are in the news that come up all the time and say, that problem there, what's the solution to that? I bet you and I could say, here's 5 companies going after that one, here's 10 companies going after that one, here's some science that's happening at University X or Y that's solving that. And so the challenge is, and where we need hope and conviction, is in execution and scale. And I do think there are some big, let's say, operational issues to solve. So, for example, here's another thing in my world at the moment. We have a number of companies that are, taking the coal out of coal-fired power stations, that are removing diesel from, renewable energy grids, that are, making these new food companies. Now, all of them, they need to spend billions of dollars between them on infrastructure. Otherwise, there's no impact on the planet, right? It's a science experiment. And who pays for those, right? There's a job. We need to rebuild the system that builds all these companies. We need to build the climate infrastructure on a massive scale. And I'm seeing people doing that as well, right? It's early, but it's happening. So I'm very optimistic. Question mark is, how many years will it take?
Yeah,
still at
that's
this
what I'm
moment,
telling you. We have a time clock. It's
I
ticking.
know. And still at this moment, I'm optimistic that the penny is starting to drop. We're starting to have the right conversations. It's all starting to turn. And, I think things like COVID, as horrible as they were, have been an eye opener for people, and has sort of started to drive new conversations. But I think that's the hard thing. The hard thing is not the technology to solve it. The hard thing is the social conversation and driving the whole thing to impact. But we can do it.
Definitely. And I think, anyway, being on the optimist side is the best way to keep moving than, stopping and just, complaining about everything. You won't change anything. So what's next for
Exactly.
Main Sequence Venture, and how can the community of investors, LPs, founders, experts listening to the show can help you guys?
Well, we're just about to do our first close of our third fund, which we're really excited about. So things are getting bigger and better. So we obviously would love to hear from people that want to invest in our fund. We love meeting co-investors from all over the world who are interested in the same kind of impact from science that we're interested in. We have lots of strong relationships with investors around the world who just want help with the science, right? And that's what sort of qualifies the relationship with us. And there's some good things to be done together there. And then finally, just founders and science teams from universities. I mean, let's talk. I want to speak to everybody. I want to speak to everybody early. I think the worst thing people can do with us is, wait until it's a sort of perfectly formed pitch. It's like, just let's start spitballing the idea and how we're going to make it massive. They're the conversations we want to have.
Fantastic. That's exciting. I'm sure we're gonna collaborate in the future, Phil. Any question I should have asked? I did not for this first part of the interview.
No, you asked all the great questions. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Phil, for your time and your incredible insight on the industry. I'm so excited to see brilliant people like you moving the ball towards a cleaner and better world. So thank you so much for joining us today.
And you, keep it up.
Hi, it's Guillaume again. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. As I said, do not hesitate to share an episode with a friend. Also, if you value the work we do for the climate tech ecosystem, here is how you can contribute to it. Today, I'm asking for your support and a donation or sponsorship to make the work of our self-funded team more viable. Even a small contribution means a lot to us. In any case, I will invite you to subscribe to our channels and visit our website startupbasecamp.org to discover more episodes like this one. And get your membership to access all our members' exclusive content. So remember, all of this is possible because of your support and donation. And we want you to be part of this collective movement against climate change. Let's keep in touch, and I hope you will enjoy our next show with us.